The story began in 2008 on the remote island of Isla Sant Hubert in the Atlantic, where InGen had established a dinosaur research lab to conduct secret genetic experiments. There, various transgenic and mutated dinosaurs were bred, some of them truly horrifying creations. A careless employee dropped a Snickers wrapper, which accidentally caused a ventilation system failure, leading to a catastrophic collapse of the island's security systems. This allowed a six-limbed, genetically twisted Tyrannosaurus mutant, dubbed the Distortus Rex, to break out of its containment. The monster rampaged across the island, killed the employee responsible, and caused such massive destruction that all personnel were forced to evacuate, abandoning the island and its failed experiments. The story then jumped to the present day, 2025, 5 years after the events of Jurassic World: Dominion. At this time, Martin Krebs, an executive of the pharmaceutical company Parkergenics, was organizing a covert operation. His company had been developing a groundbreaking drug to prevent coronary heart disease. Once completed, it could save millions of lives and bring in trillions of dollars in profit. However, the drug required DNA from 3 of the largest dinosaurs from sea, land, and air: the aquatic Mosasaurus, the land-dwelling Titanosaurus, and the sky-soaring Quetzalcoatlus, and the samples had to be taken from living creatures. Martin assembled a $20 million elite team, including former Special Forces covert operations expert Zora, paleontologist Dr. Henry Loomis, expedition leader Duncan, and his trusted partners. After everything was ready, the team quickly set off toward Isla Sant Hubert. Before departure, Martin had been tracking the movements of the Mosasaurus. He discovered that it always stayed near equatorial waters. Zora asked why it only lingered around the equator instead of migrating elsewhere. Dr. Henry Loomis explained that Earth's modern climate was no longer suitable for dinosaur survival. Only the equatorial region still resembled the environment from 60 million years ago, warm and rich in oxygen. That was why the Mosasaurus could still live there. Martin reminded everyone to complete the mission as fast as possible once they landed, and not to linger on the island, though he never explained why. Meanwhile, in the nearby waters, Ruben Delgado was sailing with his family. Suddenly, his elder daughter Teresa spotted something surfacing in the distance. Her younger sister Isabella thought it was a dolphin, but Teresa noticed that the dorsal fin's shape looked nothing like one. At that moment, their yacht was struck by a massive creature. The entire vessel tilted sharply and eventually capsized. Inside the cabin, Teresa's boyfriend Xavier was trapped. Ruben shouted for him to grab the radio and escape through the window. Fortunately, both Ruben and Xavier were strong swimmers and avoided drowning. However, the monster surfaced again and lunged straight at Xavier. In a desperate sprint, Xavier swam back to the overturned yacht and narrowly escaped death. Ruben finally saw the creature clearly. It was a Mosasaurus. Not long after, Duncan received a distress signal on the radio. It came from the very same 4 survivors. Zora suggested pausing the operation to rescue them, but team member Bobby strongly objected. He didn't want any distractions that could cost them the $20 million reward. Even though Zora promised it wouldn't delay the mission, both Martin and Bobby refused to turn back. In the end, Duncan decided to save the survivors first. Although Martin protested fiercely, he had no choice but to comply. After all, the ship belonged to Duncan. Soon, Duncan followed the signal and found the Delgado family drifting at sea. Ruben described everything that had happened, but something felt off. The Mosasaurus seemed different, and near its location, another strange dorsal fin could be seen cutting through the water. Realizing something was wrong, Duncan quickly activated the radar system. 2 large shapes appeared, rapidly approaching their vessel. Suddenly, the alarm blared. Then came a violent impact. A gigantic Mosasaurus burst from the waves and swam parallel to their ship. Zora rushed to the bow, secured herself, aimed carefully, and prepared to shoot a syringe dart to extract a blood sample. But the Mosasaurus roared in fury and slammed into the vessel. Thanks to Henry's quick reaction, Zora was pulled back to safety. Regaining her footing, Zora took aim again and successfully embedded the syringe into the creature's thick hide. The automatic injector filled with Mosasaurus blood and ejected itself, deploying a parachute to drift safely back to the deck. Henry grabbed it. The first living DNA sample was secured. As the crew cheered, a series of dorsal fins suddenly surfaced, encircling the ship. They belonged to amphibious Spinosaurus. These Spinosaurus had formed a symbiotic relationship with the Mosasaurus, helping it hunt in exchange for shared prey. Bobby thought his weapon could drive them away, or even kill them, but he underestimated creatures that had ruled the planet for over 100 million years. Without warning, a Spinosaurus leapt from the sea and swallowed Bobby whole. Moments later, the enraged Mosasaurus rammed the vessel again. The impact nearly capsized it. Isabella lost her grip and slipped out of the cabin, but Ruben managed to grab her just in time. Seeing the island's coastline ahead, Duncan pushed the engines to full power, hoping to reach the shallows and shake off the Mosasaurus. Meanwhile, Ruben told Teresa to use the radio to call for help, but doing so would expose Martin's secret operation, so he tried to stop her. During the struggle, Teresa accidentally fell overboard. Though she screamed for Martin to pull her back up, he didn't even try to help. He simply watched as she plunged into the sea. Her boyfriend Xavier grabbed the rescue gear and leapt after her without hesitation. Sensing that the Mosasaurus had marked the ship as its prey, Reuben made a desperate choice. He took Isabella's hand, and together they jumped into the ocean. At that moment, the Mosasaurus used its massive body to slam into the ship again and again, until it finally forced the vessel against the rocky shoreline. The hull was severely damaged and could barely hold together. Luckily, they had reached a shallow diving zone where the Mosasaurus couldn't get close. Duncan ordered everyone to jump into the water immediately, while he stayed behind, steering the out-of-control ship straight toward the shore. Soon after, the Delgado family was reunited safely. Meanwhile, Martin's team also made it to land, barely alive, but unfortunately, the ship had been destroyed beyond repair, which meant they were now stranded on the island. Team member Nina tried to haul up the remaining supplies, but she didn't notice that a Spinosaurus had silently crept up behind her. Before anyone could react, it lunged and devoured her in full view of the horrified. Zora quickly realized that these Spinosaurus looked different. That was when Martin finally revealed the truth. The island, he admitted, was the same site where InGen had conducted failed genetic experiments 6 years ago. After the disaster, the facility was sealed off, but the mutated creatures left behind were never eliminated. The Mosasaurus and the amphibious Spinosaurus they had just encountered were both results of those experiments. Suddenly, a terrifying roar echoed from deep within the island's jungle. Everyone knew they couldn't stay there for long, but with the ship wrecked, there was no way to leave. Fortunately, Zora had prepared a backup plan before departure. She had hired a rescue team that was monitoring their radio frequency. If they failed to respond within 24 hours, the rescue team would fly in by helicopter to extract them. Now, they had only 24 hours left to complete the mission and reach the helipad at the island's center. Time was running out. The group began their search for the next target through the dense, prehistoric wilderness. Before long, they discovered the Titanosaurus, the largest land creature ever to walk the earth. Adult Titanosaurus could reach 30 meters in height and an astonishing 50 meters in length. Despite their enormous size, they were peaceful herbivores. But this was no time for sightseeing. The team needed to collect a blood sample and get out fast. Zora aimed at one of the Titanosaurus and fired an automatic syringe dart. The gentle giant didn't even flinch. Moments later, the second DNA extraction was completed smoothly. From above, the valley was filled with dozens of massive Titanosaurus, their long necks swaying gracefully. A breathtaking sight. It was then that Zora spotted their final target on a distant cliff, the mighty Quetzalcoatlus. Meanwhile, the Delgado family had started their own adventure elsewhere on the island. A small Aquilops suddenly appeared, bringing some joy and laughter to the group. But moments later, they caught a strange smell in the air. Sensing danger, the Aquilops panicked and fled. Not far away, they saw an old, abandoned boat. If it still worked, it could be their way off the island. Teresa cautiously stepped into the shallow river and began swimming toward the vessel. When she climbed onto the platform, she found the rotting corpse of a dinosaur. As she moved forward, a small scavenger dinosaur feasting on the body noticed her. After a brief warning hiss, it ran off into the jungle. But then Teresa realized a Tyrannosaurus Rex was sleeping right beside the boat. Reuben frantically motioned for her to come back, but she gathered her courage and took a few quiet steps closer. She managed to reach the boat without waking the giant, and even found an inflatable emergency raft on board. Quickly, she dragged it out. The curious Aquilops came back, but Isabella warned it to stay away, tossing food to lure it aside. Teresa switched on the raft's air pump, and within seconds it inflated completely. But when she looked around, the Tyrannosaurus Rex was gone. Panic swept through the group until they realized it had only gone to the nearby river to drink. The four quickly climbed onto the raft. The noise caught the T-Rex's attention. It turned and roared furiously. Isabella screamed, "Paddle faster!" The raft rushed downstream as the T-Rex charged after them. The water grew deeper, and the massive predator suddenly dove underwater. Seconds later, it burst up from below, flipping the raft over with its enormous head. But strangely, the Tyrannosaurus Rex seemed to be playing rather than attacking. It didn't immediately try to eat them. The four managed to survive the chaos, but in the confusion, Isabella was nowhere to be found. They heard muffled sounds beneath the raft, which was drifting dangerously close to the T-Rex. The beast opened its jaws and bit down. Reuben screamed in despair, convinced his daughter was gone. Miraculously, Isabella was still alive, floating downstream with the current. The T-Rex chased her for a while, but eventually gave up and turned away. Then, out of nowhere, something burst from the water. It was the same inflatable raft, rising to the surface once more. On the other side of the island, Zora and her team arrived at a high cliff. They secured their ropes and began rappelling down one by one. This time, their mission was to collect samples from the eggs of the Quetzalcoatlus. Adult Quetzalcoatlus were absolute rulers of the sky, and since their nests were built hundreds of meters high on the cliffs, a direct confrontation was impossible. While searching for a safe route, Duncan noticed something hidden beneath the tall grass, an ancient temple that seemed connected to the Quetzalcoatlus nest below. It turned out that the Quetzalcoatlus had made this ancient temple its home. Inside the ruins lay over a dozen unhatched eggs. Henry carefully took out his syringe and began extracting samples from one of the eggs without damaging its membrane. But just then, Leclerc, who was securing the bolts, heard a loud shriek. A Quetzalcoatlus had returned to its nest. The moment it spotted the intruders, it became furious. It swung its massive beak and lunged at them with incredible speed. In the chaos, Henry accidentally dropped the collected sample. He and Leclerc were cornered, barely daring to move. Outside, Leclerc hurled his hammer at the creature to distract it, but that only enraged the Quetzalcoatlus even more. It turned sharply, screeched, and burst out of the temple in a frenzy. Leclerc quickly called for Duncan, who helped pull him upward with the rope. However, the Quetzalcoatlus tangled its claws in the rope mid-flight, snatching Henry and dragging him out of the temple. Fortunately, the sample had landed beside Henry and remained intact. But Leclerc wasn't so lucky. The Quetzalcoatlus dove after him, snapped him up in its jaws, and after a quick turn in the air, swallowed him whole. Next, the furious creature targeted Duncan and Martin. Martin grabbed the sample case and tried to run, but the Quetzalcoatlus blocked their path. Luckily, they dove into the tunnel they had discovered earlier, narrowly escaping the attack. Meanwhile, below, Henry finally managed to grab the fallen sample from a stone altar, but the rope above had frayed too much and suddenly snapped. He plunged downward, but giant banana leaves broke his fall, and he crashed into a pond, battered, but alive. Soon the remaining three regrouped on the ground. With this, all 3 DNA samples had finally been collected. Now, their only goal was to find the Delgado family and leave the island. At that same time, the Delgado family had reached the island's central zone, once the site of cross-species experiments, now nothing but ruins. Elsewhere, Duncan's team also found the central helipad. Zora noticed a series of footprints leading toward it. By nightfall, the 2 groups finally crossed paths in the middle of the island. When Teresa saw Martin, she couldn't control her anger and rushed forward to confront him. She told everyone that Martin had stopped her from calling for help on the boat and had coldly refused to save her. Just as the argument heated up, a deep rumbling echoed through the valley. The island's old power generator had somehow restarted. No one expected it to still work after all these years. Lights flickered on across the facility, but with them came new dangers. Several terrifying creatures appeared. Mutodon, a hybrid of raptor and pterosaur, fast, intelligent, and capable of gliding through the air like silent assassins. The group scattered and hid wherever they could. Zora slid under a vehicle for cover, while Martin tried to fight back, opening fire on the creatures. But his aim was terrible. Not a single shot hit a vital point. One Mutodon lunged, grabbing Martin and hurling him across the ground. Fortunately for him, it didn't eat him. It simply tossed him aside, as if warning that worse was yet to come. Meanwhile, the Delgado family had taken shelter inside an abandoned supermarket. But unexpectedly, a Mutodon crawled down from the ceiling vents. Before it could spot them, the 4 quickly hid under a row of shelves. Reuben then noticed a sewer grate on the floor. As the Mutodon began to search the aisles, the family quietly slipped into the sewer and escaped. At the same time, Duncan and Henry accidentally stumbled into the heart of the old laboratory, the very place where all the hybrid and mutation experiments had once been conducted. Duncan checked the monitors and spotted an escape boat docked at the tunnel that led to the ocean. Then a roaring noise thundered from above. The rescue helicopter had finally arrived. Duncan told Henry to signal the helicopter while he went to find the others. But just after Duncan left, a horrifying growl echoed behind Henry. He couldn't see the creature clearly, but he could tell it was something deadly. Once the monster moved away, Henry bolted out of the lab, trying to reach open ground and signal the helicopter. Outside, Martin had already lost his nerve. Ignoring Zora completely, he jumped into a jeep and sped off on his own. The enraged Mutodon didn't bother to chase him. It had already picked up the scent of humans hiding in the tunnels. Tearing open the manhole cover, it dove straight inside. Realizing the danger, Zora grabbed her weapon and followed it down. By now, the helicopter had been circling overhead for 2 minutes. If it didn't spot survivors soon, it would leave the island. Seeing that, Henry fired a flare into the sky. The bright signal caught the helicopter's attention, but also something else's. A strange shadow loomed behind him. Henry turned toward what he thought were helicopter lights, only to see a monstrous dinosaur emerge from the darkness. Its jaws clamped around the crushed helicopter. It was the horrifying Distortus Rex. the very mutant that had caused the original laboratory massacre. With the helicopter destroyed, their only escape route now was through the tunnels to the sea, where the boat was waiting. Deep inside the tunnel, Zora had already reunited with the Delgado family, but the Mutadon had followed them in. Zora fired a burst of bullets, each shot hitting its mark. The creature finally fell, lifeless. The group ran toward the tunnel exit, only to find the heavy steel gate sealed shut. Worse, more Mutadons were closing in from behind. In that desperate moment, brave little Isabella squeezed through a narrow gap in the gate and sprinted toward the control console. Just as she reached for the switch, the Distortus Rex appeared silently behind her. Zora and the others shouted her name, trying to draw the monster's attention. Thinking fast, Isabella slammed the lever down. The massive gate began to open, and the terrifying face of Distortus Rex appeared right before them. Suddenly, headlights flared. Martin had returned, driving recklessly toward the noise. He had gotten lost on the island and accidentally circled back, but this time, fate caught up to him. Distortus Rex grabbed him in one swift motion, lifted him into the air, and bit him in half. Zora snatched the sample case, and everyone rushed to the dock, but the crane holding the escape boat jammed halfway. At the same moment, Distortus Rex was already charging toward them. With no way out, Duncan made a bold decision. He lit a flare, waving it to draw the monster's attention. He had decided to sacrifice himself to buy the others enough time to escape. With the flare in hand, he dove into the water and swam as far as he could. When he could no longer move, he finally stopped. And in that brief window, Zora managed to lower the boat into the sea. They started the engine and sped away, but Duncan never resurfaced. Moments later, Distortus Rex returned to the dock, roaring in fury. As the escape boat powered off into the distance, Zora looked back at the dark waves, heartbroken. Everyone knew Duncan had sacrificed himself for them. But then, a bright light flashed across the sky. It was Duncan. He was alive. Against all odds, he had survived. After everything they had been through, the fear, the loss, and the miracles, everyone gained a new understanding of life. In the end, Zora decided to make all the dinosaur DNA samples public, hoping that future scientists could develop medicine that would truly benefit all of humanity.